Um, Welcome everybody to this new webinar, part of our CASI webinar series Trendsetters, where we invite thought leaders and experts from the continent or outside of the continent to talk about new trends that are impacting Africans, but also the world. And I'm very pleased today to have on this webinar Aurel Umbeji, a good friend of mine. And so I'm gonna let him introduce himself. The topic today is gonna be very interesting. We're gonna talk about climate for once. And we'll I'm sure the audience will learn a lot today from him. So Aurel, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you very much, Yannick. My name is Aurel Umbeji. I'm a risk manager by training. I'm from African diaspora. I've been in the past special advisor of the President of Benin on investment. And so that's my background. I teach finance at Johns Hopkins University as a adjunct professor for many years.
Excellent, thank you so much. So the topic today is an interesting one. We're going to talk about climate. We know climate change is a big topic. Was a big topic before we got into COVID. For some countries, it's still a big topic because it impacts our life for the long term, and we're already seeing some of the effects of climate change. So, what is climate risk, to begin with?
Thanks, Yannick. Thank you very much. To define climate risk, you have to put it in a context. So, like saying, climate risk is a very important. Climate change is important, and climate change comes with risks. And now it depends on which sector are you to talk about the risk. I'll be focusing on from financial perspective. Mm-hmm. So from financial perspective, it's a risk loss due to climate change. That's basically what it is. And now you can group those type of losses or risks in 2-3 categories. One group is the physical risk. Mm-hmm. Physical risk is a risk we are experiencing today. It's a risk due to a hurricane. Mm-hmm. Droughts, cyclone, fire. Mm-hmm. When you have the temperature goes to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, it can create some fire. So in California, for example, you have fire season, and those are due to climate change. In coastal area, you have high sea level, you have hurricane, you have those events, extreme events, weather events that destroy significantly. Without if it's the US or Africa, it's exactly. So you have drought in South Africa a couple of years ago, and it was very difficult to get water in South Africa. So when you go to a country like Mali and Burkina Faso, Sahel country, you have the weather is extreme, very dry, mm-hmm. So you don't have enough water for agriculture. Yeah. So those are physical risk. That's a manifestation of climate change as we live it today. The second category of risk is what we call a transition risk. Mm-hmm. The transition risk is the one due to transition to low carbon economy. Okay. So to give you a background, in 2015, December, we have COP21 in Paris, what they call the Paris Accord. I was advisor of the president of Benin at that time. I participated actively in that meeting. I was in Paris and in that period for that meeting. But about 200 countries have agreed to sign the accord, led by the US and France and the European countries. All the African countries were there to sign the accord to commit themselves or their country, the people, to low carbon economy in the future. So now each country has to take action. Mm-hmm. They have to take policy action to be able to meet the goal of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius from now all the way to 2100 years.
Yeah.
So to do that, the action government need to take will change the dynamic of the way people live to be able to meet that goal. Technology will also evolve to be able to contribute, to participate, to activate, or to motivate that change. You have today in China, in Europe, in US, electric car booming. It's because they're moving away, they try to move away from gasoline, fossil fuel, to move to electric car. That disruption will change people's behavior to buy electric car instead of using a fossil fuel car. So that will create a change in behavior, and that will present significant risk for companies that are in fossil fuel business today. You go to Africa, you have sun everywhere. 20 years ago, the power from the sun was very expensive. Today, it's very cheap because technology is evolving. So countries will be moving away from HFO, fossil fuel power plant, to more solar power on the continent, because that's the transition we need to go to, that's the right way to do. Also, you have hydrogen. This is a new technology that's coming up. It's very clean and does not emit anything. And technology is evolving, going through that. So the change in behavior, in technology, and policy can disrupt the way people live and create some risk to the balance sheet of several companies, because they have all those assets on the balance sheet today that function, or their business model is based on fossil fuel. So the third group I will talk about is the liability risk. That's particularly for insurance companies. Liability risk is the risk due to the loss for insurance company, because they're insuring some of the assets which are clearly exposed to climate. Last year in the US, we had the first bankruptcy of utility companies in California because of the climate change. So climate, those three categories of risk: physical risk, transition risk, and liability risk, are the three groups of risks linked directly to climate change. And those risks, those climate change events and those risks affect all activities in the economy we live in.
Thank you. So, I mean, you pretty much laid out how important this issue is. And I guess the next question is, what are our leaders and, you know, central banks and key stakeholders doing to make sure that the risk is identified, that we understand that we have a framework. I know there was a task force put together to look at financial you know, monitoring, etc. So can you give us an idea of what are the frameworks today in place to tackle this?
There's so much going on in this area today. World Economic Forum Global Risk Report in January, before COVID, put climate risk or climate change related risk at the top of its risk in its risk report. Top in terms of likelihood of occurring, top as well as impact of when it's occurring. So it's a major emerging risk globally. Since 2015, the G20 Ministry of Finance leaders, they ask the private sector and the authority, the regulatory authority in UK, to look into the financial impact of climate change. And by asking that, that's why the task force was put in place, led by Bloomberg. The task force in 2017 proposed its recommendation. And the recommendation is a simple framework. It is not binding. It's voluntary. It allows each institution, financial and non-financial, to be able to disclose the climate change related financial risk exposure. So The recommendation have 4 pillars. The first pillar is the governance. What the governance around the financial risk related to climate in your institution. Second pillar is the strategy. How do you take into account the climate risks into the strategy of your institution? The third pillar is the risk management. How do you manage the risk, the financial risk related to climate change in your institution? And the fourth pillar is the metrics and target. What are the metrics you use and the target you set to be able to meet climate Paris Accord? Those are the 4 pillars. Parallelly to those, the TCFD, you have central banks. They create a network at the same period called the Network for Greening Financial System. So in 2015 or 2016, there were about 15 or 20 central banks. Today, there are more than 65 central banks. The objective of that central, the secretary of that network is the Bank of France. And it's led by, I think, the Dutch head of central bank. So that network has a role to play. The role is, how do you come up with the framework, as your question, to answer directly your question, how to come up with the framework that will allow banks and financial institutions to manage, to address those financial risks related to climate. BIS is working on that. In December last year, early January, BIS published a book called Green Swan.
Yeah, BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlement.
Yeah.
Just for the audience. Yeah.
Yes. So BIS published the Green Swan. We all know the Black Swan.
Yeah.
One
the Green Swan.
Risk that's related to climate.
Okay.
It can be devastating, as well as like Mark Cannon said, the horizon is just very near, and the tragedy is the risk. Climate risk is seen as the tragedy at the horizon, or the tragedy of the horizon. It's not, it won't come. It will come with full impact, because we already seen the impact today. How do we try to create the awareness among leadership to make sure that this risk is being taken into account? Climate change risk has been is always considered, but from the environmental perspective and the reputational risk perspective. When you invest in a project in a country, you want to make sure that you don't disrupt the population, you don't affect the environment. For many years, many companies have been doing that globally. But today, it's more pronounced, we focus more on the financial impact or the financial risk related to climate risk.
Yeah.
And we know different type of risk. We always, as a risk manager, we manage the credit risk, we manage market risk, we manage operational risk, strategy risk, we manage all those. And now climate risk is emerging risk that's linked to all those type of traditional risks we're already managing. Okay. So today it's evolving. There are so many bodies, so many shareholders or stakeholders that are working toward the methodologies for both climate, from both transition and physical risk. Okay. Insurers for more than 100 years, they have been measuring and managing the catastrophic risk related to weather. So they know how to take care of some of those risks. But for an institution like a bank that lend money to companies around the world or in a specific region of Africa, where different type of the portfolio is exposed to different type of climate risk, that's what we're talking about more today. How do you assess those risks? How do you disclose those exposures? How do you know what your exposure is, and how do you manage that going forward? Okay. So that framework is ongoing. And is new, and a lot of work has been being done today in the industry globally. European countries are much more advanced in that, because even though the TCFD is not mandatory, I think European banks, central banks, European countries are much more advanced because Paris Accords is European.
Yeah.
Like Europeans are much more pushing for it, and so they're doing all they can do to make sure that they move to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees a world in the next 80 years.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next question, I guess. What are some of the opportunities that you see? Again, with an emerging risk like climate change, there's definitely opportunity, as well as risk, and specifically when it comes to the African continent. So what do you see as opportunities?
A lot of opportunities relate to climate change. That's why we talk about climate change, risk, and opportunities. Like I told you, the Paris Accord, 200 countries commit to take policies, transform the way the people live, make different policies globally to meet the objective of 2 degrees. In doing so, that means you have to change from where we are today. Meaning,
sorry, but by 2 degrees, you mean the objective is to drop the global temperature by 2 degrees, right?
No, the objective is to have to bring the temperature to 2 degrees
below
the pre-industrial period.
Okay,
that's what it is.
Okay.
So, or the terminology of net zero a temperature, or you have there are so many terminologies, and also it depends on where you talk, who you talk to, or the scientists you talk to. So, but the objective is the same: is to bring the economy to low carbon economy or zero carbon economy. That's why they talk about sometimes net zero. The net zero does not necessarily mean that there is no temperature carbon emission. Some people emit carbon. Some people already do it. They do everything to not emit anything. When you plant trees globally around the world, that absorb carbon. So if you have power plant emitting where the emission is going up and the tree absorbing, so the net is the one you look at. So that's why people talk about net zero.
Net zero carbon emission.
Emission.
Okay.
So those are technical definitions, and scientists, there are a lot of scientific definitions related to that. But when I come here, it is for the opportunities. There are trillion dollars of investment opportunities in climate business. You can issue green bond, for example, to finance projects that specifically green projects. You can invest in technology. If Nigeria today, or a country specifically today, decide to have more only a solar power, okay, it's hypothetical. So that means they have to invest in equipment that will provide solar power. So that's investment opportunities. If you have to invest in smart grid to transport power efficiently and sustainably. So again, that's also investment opportunities. You can build new cities, because you have a city sometime in Africa which is crowded. So you can create new cities, and if you have the opportunity to do that, that means you can create in a sustainable way by making it green, environmental friendly, and sustainable, as well as financially viable. So those are a lot of opportunities. In power area, for example, in Africa needs power. If you look at the high 5 or the top 5 priority of the African Development Bank, Power Africa is critical. It's one of the priorities. So we can invest and diversify the mix of power source in Africa by investing more in technology, and that will bring power at low cost and good quality, and as well as fight climate. So there are so many opportunities.
I know.
invest. I'm not talking about electric car, because electric car will come to Africa.
Yes.
Being developed here today, if you look at companies like Tesla in the US, NIO in China, there are so much investment going on in those sectors, because that's where the future is.
And I believe the African Development Bank also has a green bond program.
Yeah, that's I think because they try to target green investment, green
solar
project.
energy. Yeah,
exactly. So you have those mix of opportunities that there are too much. There are $1 trillion available today in pension fund, in global fund managers in the US and globally, where the stakeholders are pushing them to move the money toward sustainable investment. That means they need to find places to invest those money, because the shareholder are asking them to do so.
Of course.
And therefore, any project or any good project that will be green and sustainable can have funding easily, potentially. You can also see in Canada, for example, when in other countries, when after COVID, all the aid they provide to some company, they are attached to constraint to those aid. You have to meet some criteria vis-a-vis to the climate change, vis-a-vis to sustainability, to be able to use that money. So again, all those efforts are being pushed because they want the economy to move toward low carbon economy in the years to come. And a lot is being done for that. A lot of opportunity in those. So whoever is in a position to create the opportunities and look for funding, that I think those are possibilities that are there.
Very good. So it's very interesting because again, we went from talking about climate risk, which impacts life, livelihood, to finding solution as potentially being one of the biggest opportunity for African businesses and African entrepreneurs, because there's so much capital, right?
Exactly.
That is now
capital is out there.
Yeah.
As well as if you have a technology, you have a business today, and you do your assessment, know that your exposure to climate change can destroy your business in 10 years to come. What you need to do today, you invest in technology, you invest in adapting your business model, your assets, investing. If you have a building, for example, where it's not sustainable, okay, so but you can make it sustainable and maintain that building. So you need to invest in such a way that the building you have today, which is not green, can become green tomorrow. So that investment is also an opportunity. In Europe, because the Europeans are much more rigorous about climate change, they are building in major cities in Europe today. They won't be there in 10 years, or they won't work anything in 10 years if they don't meet the criteria of being there in 10 years. And those criteria have to be sustainability. So they will require investment to move them to the level of to satisfy those criteria. And all those are investment opportunities for banks to finance new activities of today's businesses that will put them from today's carbon economy to the low carbon economy. So it's very linked. Also, it depends on the ambition of each country commitment to move to 2 degrees world. If you are very aggressive and your commitment to climate accord is very strong, that means that you require a lot of potential disruption as well as risk and opportunities to move to transition.
So, what do you think about the debate around industrializations and climate change? Because we've seen a lot of countries around the climate change call. On one end saying, we are not emitting carbon, or we're not the big, emitters of CO2. On the other end, others saying, well, if we can emit, how are we going to industrialize, right? So are we saying that you can still industrialize actually by going towards a more sustainable economy? Is it how you see it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be gradual. Okay, it's not going to. Nobody is saying that. Okay, you will from today or to next year you will change everything to green. yes, Africa need to industrialize, to move to industrialization. That's for sure. But you have to do it smartly. So there are technology today that can lead you there. Okay, that's where you have to think. Because I've been in the government for 4 years where you think about these things. Sometimes you need to sit down and do everything on paper before you move to operationalization. So if you want to build a factory today to do X, Y, and Z, how can you do that, make that factory to today to make it sustainable? Instead of waiting for or buying, if you go to Africa, you see generators running 24/7, emitting every day. Why do you buy a generator if you can put in place a solar power system to run your facilities? So the generator, you can buy it and put gasoline in and run it. Sure, sometimes it's even more expensive. But again, those questions need to be asked early at early stage of the project to make sure that mitigation solutions have been thought of before they move to implementation.
Okay.
So industrialization is completely necessary in Africa.
Yeah.
Power is completely necessary. We have the sun. Okay, it's open for everybody. We need to do more in terms of promoting solar power, solar energy, and green energy to be able to power our facilities.
So you're talking about again, because going back to the topic of risk. So how do you see the management of this risk, from a financial institution perspective? You and I, we've been in Africa, work with, some banks in Africa, and we know how, what's the level of, development of risk management on the continent. So we're adding on top of it, another risk, which is climate. And so what's your take on that, right? Where does climate sits between market, operational risk and credit risk, and what can institutions do, financial institutions?
Is like I said earlier, it's an evolving process. Methodology are being developed, but this is the classical way to assess that. Today, you have a bank that have a corporate book, loan book. When each client is rated, has a rating, and the loan is made according to the rating of the company. So if you don't assume any climate risk exposure, you know how to rate a company, right? So we have that there, methodology are there, all the rating agencies in Africa, Brookfield, in Abidjan, they're all doing that.
Yeah.
Now, if you say, okay, this company has potential exposure to climate risk, so you can assess how those can be, how the credit quality of that company can be affected if the climate overlay the credit. So what you need to do is to see what the exposure, potential exposure of that company to climate risk. How that exposure affects cash flow in terms of revenue, in terms of cost of goods. If you are a company that needs to adapt to climate by investing more in CapEx to be able to improve your technology, the sustainability of your infrastructure, your activity, that means you increase the cost. If you increase cost, that affects your cash flow going forward. If you are in a situation where you produce something that the demand is not there anymore, that means your revenue is going down for the next year to come. So that means your cash flow again going down. So you can look at those pillars: cost, increase in cost because you need to invest in technology, and reduction in revenue because your good is not in demand anymore. So that are critical items on balance sheet, financial statement that can affect your credit quality. So you do your basis, your normal credit assessment to come up the ratings, and you find a way, the methodology is evolving, but you can find a way to assess what the potential impact on climate, on revenue, on transition risk, on cost of goods or cost of CapEx, and those will affect your cash flow. So you can have one base rating, which is normal rating, and the second rate adjusted for climate.
Yeah.
So you can assess the delta there to know how much risk climate is bringing to So that's one way to do it. Same thing for agricultural projects, for example. If you invest in producing a product on a crop on land with the possibility of selling those crops in the future, if you don't produce a good crop or the good quality or the good quantity because of the climate or drought and so forth, so clearly you won't be able to meet the cash flow. So what you need to do today potentially maybe is to adapt the seed to such that the seed can be much resistant to drought. So that resistance may need to increase the cost for you to achieve that. And that cost will affect potentially your cash flow. So that delta also can help you to assess that. If you have you invest in housing at the coastal area in Africa, and the sea level goes up, or you have hurricane, so after the hurricane is gone, or the extreme event is gone, you reassess the housing, your investment there. You have to look at LTV, for example, of those loans, loan to value of the asset you have. Those will be affected, and that can affect the credit. So there are so many ways to look at it. And if you have asset on the balance sheet, and you look at the cost to invest in that asset to make it to low carbon economy. If the cost is too much, or you don't do anything, the asset may become stranded asset. If it is stranded asset, you have it on your book, but it may not worth anything. That was again the loss for the company.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have so many pillars to be able to assess those, but the methodology are evolved. That's why they call scenario analysis. Last month, the Greening Network for the Network for Greening Financial System, NGFS, they just published the new scenarios where you look at the scenario from today to 2100. So each part of the scenario has a lot of assumptions, and on each part you can assess the vulnerability or the risk of what you have on your balance sheet as a point.
And so that brings the question of capital. Are the regulators tying capital to climate risk at the moment, or not yet?
No, there's no regulation.
There's no regulation. Okay.
So every TCFD is is not mandatory. Is a voluntary exercise. Okay. Possibly it may become mandatory. I'm not sure. Yeah. So that thing, regulators are not forcing anybody to do that. Today is a voluntary. Okay. In terms of capital, if your capital at the bank is tied to credit risk, and you have a lot of assets that are affected by climate, clearly your credit will be affected. Risk. Yeah. So potentially capital can be affected. And again, the challenge is there is you have the data challenge, you have the time horizon challenge. Climate horizon is 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. But your loan book is maybe you look at that for the next 3 years. Yeah. So even though you want to take that into account, how do you mitigate, or what kind of adjustment you make for the time horizon? Yeah. Those are critical issues today on the table. Okay. And again, the industry is heavily working toward methodologies to come up with ways to assess those.
Okay, very good. So, I mean, maybe one last thing, before we end. Definitely, climate change is a big trend. It's a big issue. It's a big risk, as you clearly articulated it. But we are in the midst of COVID, which again is probably today the biggest issue that the entire globe is facing. How do you compare climate change, COVID? And so where do you as a risk manager, where do you put COVID, and going forward with the climate negotiations and the push that we've seen from stakeholders that are saying we can't meet these targets, it's unrealistic. Now with the pandemic risk basically that has materialized, how do you see these two trends evolving?
I think it's a challenge. The COVID is a sort of wake-up call for all of us, because COVID just came and we're still living it, okay? And the first thing to climate is maybe resources have been drawn toward COVID management away from climate commitment. That's a potential risk. But again, the notion of preparedness to fight something is critical, okay? So for us, that's the opportunity for everyone today to make sure that the climate events are happening more and more every day. This is the wake-up call, because we need to do something now to prevent that in the future, because it can only exacerbate going forward, okay? So COVID is a situation that came this year, and we're still experiencing, we're still living that. It affects the entire world, it affects the entire economy, the global economy, and hopefully we get a vaccine for that. But at the same time, at the early stage of COVID, there was a lot of report on, because everybody was shut down, the whole world was shut down, the atmosphere cleaned itself, and that's also counterintuitive. Do we need to do that? But again, this is the opportunity for all countries in the world to be able to take climate much more seriously. We know that it's going to happen.
Exactly.
The impact is going to be big or repetitive, okay? If we don't do anything, we'll experience things that's happening. You need to prepare to avoid the COVID type experience we're having today. That's why the commitment to the Paris Accord clearly has to be, if you make the commitment, I think people need to live up to their commitment. It can take more time. The COP26, for example, was supposed to happen this year. It has been pushed because of COVID. So that's where you have to. The COP26 is critical, because the notion of financing the transition to low carbon is part of the big agenda of COP26. And again, COVID will be integrated in those planning for the COP26 that will come eventually next year and the year to come, if it's not next year. So yeah, COVID is a good example of a thing that can happen suddenly and create a lot of issues. That's why preparedness is critical. And climate, we know that it's going to happen. It's already happening. So we need to prepare for it. And one way to prepare for it is for the Paris Accord, which is one of the master accords that exist related to climate today, need to be followed, or to maintain engagement.
So there is, I mean, there is definitely a parallel, I guess, that we can draw between COVID and climate risk, in terms of the impact that climate change and climate risk can have globally, not just regionally, but globally, because again, climate is it's a global issue. But again, like she said, COVID also is a wake-up call in terms of reminding everybody that we better be prepared, right? Because when it happens, we've seen GDP the third quarter in the US dropping by 32%. Never seen, in probably the history of the country. So I think, you're definitely right, in saying that it is an interesting parallel and a wake-up call for everybody to think about it. So, lastly, Aurel, I know you've been heavily working on this. It's as we talked earlier, it's something that I think you really see as a trend, upcoming trend. Maybe one word of advice for stakeholders, especially in Africa, given where we are, given the impact that we're facing with COVID, when it comes to climate change. Like, how do we see this going forward? And three things that our stakeholders, governments, can look at to turn this challenge into an opportunity, specifically for the African continent.
I think this is a personal view. I just want to say that I think lesson learned from COVID are critical. And if you go back to 2015, December, what are the commitments made by government? They need to stick to those commitments. And in doing so, they will identify the opportunities in which they need to invest or they need to mobilize funds to make sure that we move to lower carbon economy. It presents significant opportunity for Africa. You have the population in Africa, the majority is under 27, depending on the statistic you look at, or 19 if you go to Ethiopia. It depends which poll you take. But the opportunity are there for the youth in terms of technology, in terms of solar for powering our economies. Clearly, we need to have industrialization for sure. But again, we need to take a step back to look at what are the lessons we learned from COVID. What level of preparation we need to be able to be in good position for any potential a bad situation like pandemic we have. It can be climate event. What are the lessons learned and how will you get prepared for that? Preparedness is critical. And strategically, how do you position yourself to champion green investment, green projects, green activities, to also integrate that in the daily life of the population? Because the change in behavior dramatically can change the way the country move forward. And communication of those things need to be done also at the higher levels as well as the population level. If you don't educate your people about the danger of something happening in the near future, and that danger can be very big, they won't know how to prepare for it, really. I know that there are a lot of challenges in Africa. I've been in the government for 4 years when I have to deal with those things on a daily basis. Everything is almost urgency. I wrote a book about it, actually. But when you prepare and think ahead, you can manage better those things. Okay. And I think that's what I will recommend. Preparedness, and preparedness has a vision for an Africa that the vision is there. You have African we all want. But how do we integrate that? How do we adapt that to the new realities? Now COVID has to be integrated. The world after COVID. People talk about world after COVID. And there won't be a world after COVID because we are the world with COVID. Because you don't know if next year you have a vaccine or December you have vaccine. Even though you have vaccine today in developed countries, it doesn't mean that in Africa the vaccine will be there tomorrow for everybody. So, but the African population is very young, resilient, robust, and we need to make sure that we use that as an asset to face tomorrow's challenges. And I think that's my message.
Well, with that said, very good word of wisdom and optimism for the future. I want to thank you very much, Aurel, from all our audience to accept to join us to talk about this very important issue, which is climate change and climate risk when it comes to the African continent. It was very insightful, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation, and keep up the good work, and we'll talk again. Thank you. Okay, thanks.